Before Rome, before Greece wrote its epics, before the Balkans had names, there were the Illyrians, a people of mountains and coastlines, of stone fortresses and warships, of languages that vanished into silence. They fought Rome. They traded across the Adriatic. They ruled territories stretching from the eastern Alps to the shores of the Ionian Sea. And yet, we still do not know who they truly were. Tonight, we step carefully into the fog of antiquity, not to chase legends, but to examine the unsolved secrets of the Illyrians, their warriors, their lost language, and the origins that may still shape the Balkans today. The shadow before history. Long before the rise of the Roman Republic, tribes identified as Illyrian occupied much of the Western Balkans. Ancient Greek writers mentioned them as fierce highland tribes beyond the civilized world. Roman historians described them as pirates, rebels, and relentless warriors. But here is the problem. Almost everything we know about the Illyrians comes from outsiders, from their enemies, from those who conquered them. Their own voice is missing. No preserved Illyrian epic, no surviving Illyrian chronicle, no definitive inscriptions explaining who they believed themselves to be. They appear in history suddenly, and then slowly dissolve into Roman identity. But who were they before Rome? The warriors of the Western Balkans. The Illyrians were not a single unified kingdom. They were a mosaic of tribes. Among them, Dardani, Ardeae, Taulentii, Libornians. Each had its own leaders, territories, and alliances, but they shared something powerful, a reputation for war. Illyrian helmets and shields found in burial mounds reveal strong martial culture. Hilltop fortresses built from massive stone blocks still crown landscapes across modern Albania, Kosovo, Montenegro, and Croatia. These were not primitive settlements. They were strategic, defensive, organized. When the Roman Republic expanded eastward, it did not encounter scattered tribes. It encountered resistance. The Illyrian wars lasted decades. One queen in particular terrified Rome, Teuta. In the 3rd century BC, she commanded naval forces that dominated the Adriatic. Rome accused her of piracy. But was it piracy or control of vital trade routes? Her conflict with Rome marked one of the first major Roman military interventions across the Adriatic, and it would not be the last. The mystery of their language. Perhaps the greatest Illyrian secret is their language. Unlike Greek or Latin, Illyrian left almost nothing behind. We have fragments, names of people, names of rivers, names of tribes, but no complete text, no preserved grammar, no bilingual inscriptions. It is one of the most poorly attested ancient languages in Europe. Some scholars believe it may be connected to later Albanian. Others argue the evidence is too thin. The truth? We do not know. And this is extraordinary. An entire people, spanning centuries, leaving almost no linguistic footprint. How does a language disappear so completely? Was it absorbed into Latin during Romanization? Did it evolve quietly into something new? Or are we missing archaeological discoveries still buried beneath Balkan soil? Origins: indigenous or migratory? Where did the Illyrians come from? This question is still debated. Some historians argue they were indigenous to the Western Balkans, descendants of Bronze Age cultures that gradually formed tribal identities. Others suggest waves of Indo-European migrations shaped their emergence. Archaeological cultures like the Glasenac-Mati complex show continuity in burial traditions and weapon styles across centuries. But continuity does not equal identity. Were the Illyrians a cultural label, a political grouping, or a true ethnic unity? Even ancient writers used the term Illyrian loosely. It may have been a name given by outsiders to multiple distinct peoples. If that is true, then the Illyrians were not one people, but many. And our modern understanding may oversimplify them. The Roman transformation. When Rome finally subdued Illyrian territories, everything changed. Roads were built, cities were reorganized, local elites were integrated into Roman administration. Gradually, Illyrian identity blurred into Roman provincial life. But interestingly, several later Roman emperors were born in Illyrian territories. Among them, Diocletian, Constantine the Great. The so-called Illyrian emperors stabilized Rome during times of crisis. Did remnants of Illyrian culture influence Roman military discipline? Did frontier resilience shape imperial leadership? The irony is striking. Rome conquered Illyria, but Illyria may have strengthened Rome.
Could it rewrite the Balkans? Why does this matter today? Because identity in the Balkans is deeply rooted in antiquity. Nations look to the past for continuity, for legitimacy, for belonging. If new discoveries were to clearly define Illyrian origins, language, and cultural continuity, it could reshape historical narratives, not politically, but academically. It could clarify migration patterns, reveal lost connections, reframe how we understand early European civilization. But until that evidence appears, the Illyrians remain partially hidden, not myth, not legend, but incomplete history. The Roman transformation expanded. When Rome finally secured control over Illyrian territories, it did not erase them overnight. Conquest in the Balkans was gradual, difficult, costly. The Illyrian Wars were only the beginning. Decades later, during the Great Illyrian Revolt from 6 to 9 AD, tribes across the Western Balkans united in one of the most serious uprisings Rome ever faced. It required enormous military resources to suppress. Some Roman writers later admitted it was one of the hardest wars since the conflict with Carthage. That detail matters. Rome did not fear weak opponents. It feared organized resistance. After the revolt was crushed, Rome changed strategy. Instead of ruling from a distance, it integrated the region more directly into imperial structure. Roads were carved through mountains. Fortresses were rebuilt in Roman style. Urban centers expanded. Cities such as Salona and Skopje grew into important administrative hubs. Latin spread. Roman law replaced tribal codes. Young men from Illyrian lands were recruited into Roman legions in large numbers. And something unexpected happened. The frontier hardened them. The Balkans were not gentle lands. Mountain warfare, harsh winters, tribal loyalties. These conditions produced disciplined soldiers. By the 3rd century AD, when Rome faced internal collapse and external invasions, emperors increasingly came from these frontier provinces. Men born in Illyrian regions rose through the ranks because they understood survival. Among them were figures like Diocletian, who restructured the entire empire to prevent collapse, and Constantine the Great, who would later transform the religious landscape of Europe. The irony is profound. A region once described as rebellious and dangerous became the stabilizing backbone of Rome. But here is the deeper question. Did Illyrian identity vanish, or did it adapt? Disappearance or transformation?
By the late Roman period, the term Illyrian begins to fade from official use. Provincial names replaced tribal labels. Citizenship blurred ethnic lines. Intermarriage, trade, military service all contributed to gradual assimilation. But cultural disappearance is rarely immediate. Traditions can survive quietly, in rural communities, in burial practices, in oral customs never written down. Archaeologists have noted continuity in certain hill fort settlements long after Roman administration took control. Local pottery styles persisted. Certain decorative motifs endured. Was this resistance or simply adaptation? History often tells us when empires rise and fall. It rarely tells us what happens in the villages. Chapter 7. The language that refuses to speak. The Illyrian language remains one of Europe's great unsolved puzzles. We possess no full inscription written clearly and undeniably in Illyrian. What survives are fragments, personal names carved into Roman stones, place names preserved in geography, occasional words referenced by ancient authors. It's like trying to reconstruct an entire symphony from a few scattered notes. Some linguists explore possible connections between Illyrian and the modern Albanian language. Others argue that the evidence is too sparse to make definitive claims. The debate continues because the stakes are significant. If a clear linguistic continuity were proven, it would provide one of the strongest cultural bridges between antiquity and the present in the Balkans. But until that evidence appears, the Illyrians remain partially hidden. Not myth, not legend, but incomplete history. Archaeology beneath the surface. Across Albania, Kosovo, Montenegro, Bosnia, and Croatia, ancient hill forts still stand. Massive stone walls without mortar, circular enclosures on mountain ridges, strategic views over valleys and trade routes. These structures were not random. They suggest territorial control and organized defense. Burial mounds reveal weapons carefully placed beside the dead, spears, helmets, ornaments of bronze and iron. Status mattered. Identity mattered. Trade goods discovered in Illyrian graves include Greek ceramics and imported luxury items. This was not an isolated culture. They were connected to Mediterranean trade networks. They understood commerce. They understood diplomacy. So the old stereotype of barbarian highlanders begins to weaken under archaeological evidence. They were complex, organized, strategic. But complexity does not automatically equal unity. Were they ever one people? Or did Rome and later historians simplify a mosaic into a single name?
The question of identity. Ancient writers used the term Illyrian broadly. Sometimes it described coastal tribes, sometimes inland mountain communities, sometimes it was simply a geographic label. This creates a modern dilemma. When we say Illyrians, what do we truly mean? A shared language? A political alliance? A cultural pattern? Or a Roman administrative category? The Balkans have always been a crossroads. Migration, trade, conflict, layers upon layers of movement. Perhaps the Illyrians were not a single origin story. Perhaps they were a network of related but distinct groups who shared certain customs while maintaining local identities. If that is true, then the search for a single origin may be the wrong question. Maybe the Illyrian story is not about unity, but about diversity long before modern nations existed. What future discoveries could reveal? Archaeology in the Balkans is still evolving. New technologies, ground-penetrating radar, DNA analysis, advanced excavation methods are gradually revealing deeper layers of prehistoric life. Ancient DNA studies may eventually clarify population continuity between Bronze Age inhabitants and later historical communities. A single bilingual inscription, Illyrian and Latin, for example, could transform linguistic debates overnight.
A preserved ritual site could reshape our understanding of their spiritual beliefs, because that is another mystery. We know little about their religion beyond references to deities mentioned by outsiders. What gods did they pray to before Roman influence? What myths did they tell their children? What did they believe about death? History remembers empires, but identity lives in belief. Why the Illyrians still matter. This is not just about the distant past. It is about understanding how identities form, how cultures survive conquest, how languages disappear or evolve. The Balkans remain one of Europe's most historically layered regions. Understanding the Illyrians is not about claiming ownership of antiquity. It is about filling gaps in human history. They were there. They shaped the region. They resisted Rome. They produced leaders who later stabilized an empire. And then they dissolved into something new. That transformation from tribe to province to imperial center is one of the most fascinating shifts in ancient Europe. The quiet mystery. Stand again on a mountain ridge overlooking the Adriatic. Imagine the sound of distant horns signaling from one hill fort to another. Imagine traders moving along hidden paths. Imagine a language spoken confidently across valleys, a language now silent. The Illyrians are not mythical, they are historical, but they remain incomplete. And sometimes, what is incomplete is more powerful than what is fully known, because mystery invites discovery. And somewhere beneath Balkan soil, beneath layers of Roman stone and medieval walls, the missing pieces may still be waiting, not lost, just undiscovered.
The Illyrian gods and the sacred landscape. History tells us about their wars. Archaeology tells us about their fortresses. But what did the Illyrians believe? Unlike the Greeks or Romans, they left no surviving mythological texts, no epic poems describing gods descending from mountains, no preserved creation stories. Yet fragments exist. Ancient inscriptions and Roman-era dedications mention deities that appear to have Illyrian origins. Names like Medaurus, Bindus. Medaurus appears associated with protection and warfare, possibly depicted as a mounted guardian figure. Bindus seems connected to springs and water sources, suggesting sacred relationships with natural landscapes. This is important. Many ancient cultures tied divinity to geography, mountains, rivers, forests. The Balkans are rich with dramatic terrain. It is possible the Illyrians practiced a form of localized sacred worship where each valley, each spring carried spiritual significance. Roman rule did not eliminate these beliefs immediately. Instead, Roman religion often absorbed local gods, merging them into familiar forms. A native deity might be equated with Mars, or Jupiter, or Neptune. But beneath the Roman name, the older belief may have endured, hidden in plain sight. Symbols, tattoos, and identity marks. Some ancient sources describe Illyrian tribes as tattooed. Body markings in antiquity often signified status, tribe, spiritual protection, or warrior achievement. While direct physical evidence is scarce, artistic depictions suggest distinctive ornamentation and jewelry styles. Bronze fibules, decorative clasps found in Illyrian graves, are highly intricate. Spiral patterns and geometric motifs repeat across regions. Symbols are not random. They communicate identity. Were these motifs purely decorative, or did they represent clan affiliation, spiritual belief, protection in battle? Without written explanation, we are left interpreting fragments, but repetition across centuries suggests cultural continuity. The Illyrians may not have left books, but they left patterns, and patterns speak. Masters of the Adriatic. Greek and Roman writers frequently accused certain Illyrian tribes of piracy, but piracy is often a word used by dominant powers to describe competitors. The Adriatic Sea was a crucial trade artery between the Italian peninsula and the Balkans. Control of maritime routes meant economic influence. The tribe known as the Liburnians were particularly renowned sailors. Their ships were fast and maneuverable, so effective that Rome later adopted similar designs for its own navy. This detail is often overlooked. If Rome copied their ships, that implies respect for their naval engineering. Were the Illyrians simple raiders or skilled maritime strategists controlling regional trade? The difference matters. One narrative paints them as disruptive outsiders. The other frames them as regional powers defending economic interests. History is often written by victors, and Rome was victorious. Daily life beyond the battlefield. It is easy to imagine ancient peoples only through warfare, but most Illyrians were not warriors. They were farmers, metalworkers, herders, traders. Archaeological sites reveal grain storage pits, tools for agriculture, weaving equipment, and evidence of livestock domestication. Their economy appears mixed. Mountain pastoralism combined with valley agriculture and coastal trade. Iron production was significant in some regions. Weapon quality suggests advanced metallurgy for its time. This was not a scattered primitive society. It was regionally adaptive. Mountain tribes structured differently from coastal tribes. Climate shaped culture, and culture shaped survival. Genetics and the question of continuity. Modern science has introduced a new dimension to the Illyrian mystery: ancient DNA. Population studies in the Balkans reveal deep continuity in certain genetic markers stretching back thousands of years. However, genetics does not equal ethnicity. DNA can reveal migration patterns and population stability. It cannot confirm language. It cannot confirm cultural identity. Still, it adds nuance. If certain populations remained in the Western Balkans through the Bronze Age into Roman times, it strengthens the argument that Illyrian identity may have evolved locally rather than arriving through mass migration. But science remains cautious. The Balkans have experienced waves of migration: Slavic movements, Roman settlement, Ottoman influence, and many others. Layers upon layers. Untangling them requires time and patience.
The Illyrians stand at a crossroads between myth and history. They were real. They fought Rome. They shaped the Adriatic world. They built fortresses that still overlook valleys today. And yet, they remain partially silent. In some ways, that silence is powerful because it reminds us how fragile historical memory is. Empires fall, languages fade, names change. But beneath the soil, beneath the mountains, beneath the coastlines, the past remains.